Welcome to It with the Hot Seat, Dana. It's a pleasure to have you with us today.
It's an honor to be here.
It's an honor to welcome you here in Jaipur, my city.
Right here.
Yes.
All right.
So, friends, as we all know, the Dana is one of the foremost spokespersons of homeopathy. He is a celebrated author. He is a celebrated spokesperson of homeopathy. He is well known as an activist and as an educationist, as an academician, as a researcher. He wears many hats, and we are going to question about all those hats that he wears on his bald head right now.
It's a solar panel.
Yes, for me too. We have two today. So Dana, you are coming here right from Mumbai after attending the homeopathic conference, research conference. What was your experience there?
Well, one of the things I mentioned there, that if there was a sport of homeopathy in the International Olympics, India would probably win the gold medal. And that's not just because of the number of homeopaths and the number of schools, but the amount of integration of homeopathy in all classes. You know, low, medium, and high classes. The integration in the government, the now increasing support of government in funding homeopathic projects and now even homeopathic research. And in the variety of schools of thought of homeopathy. Not just the normal classical, but of course Raja and Sankaran's contributions I think are an important addition. And I don't think of that as something separate, but just complementary, because I believe that we need many flowers to bloom. There's not only one tree that's appropriate, we need a variety of trees.
Yes.
And so I do think that India is also conducting some good research. Now, of course, we need more. And we do need to honor some of the scientific traditions. What I'm meaning by that is more of the double-blinded placebo-controlled trials. Because although there were a number of such scientific studies talked about at this conference, some of them were not blinded in any way. And although some of the researchers said that they felt it was unethical to give some human patients a placebo, although I can sympathize with that point of view, that doesn't change minds or hearts of some skeptics. And I know we cannot expect to change every skeptic. But we do have to realize, even when we're doing basic science studies, that although you cannot expect a placebo in an animal or in a plant, because the researcher knows that plant or animal is being treated, that homeopath or the researcher might assess the results differently. And there is why we really do need objective trials. And here is where double-blinded, placebo-controlled trials are so important. Now, even in that said, you know, we need research not just to prove homeopathy, but other research to improve homeopathy. And so that doesn't necessarily need to be double-blind and placebo-controlled.
Yes. So, for our audience, can you describe the difference between research to prove homeopathy and research to improve homeopathy?
Well, for instance, there was one study that one immunologist and homeopath conducted on people with malaria. And it was a series of consecutive cases. So it wasn't blinded or placebo-controlled. But the results were consistently showing that the 30C of cinchona was getting better results than the 200 or the 1M. To me, that's important. And so now that is a way of improving our practice. Methods to prove our practice, you know, is where we really show that there is a difference between those given a homeopathic treatment and those given a placebo. And sometimes that can be done in a reductionistic fashion. One of the speakers that had planned to be there, but ultimately could not attend due to an injury, was a doctor from Vienna, Michael Frass, who I have a great amount of respect for, and I really look forward to seeing, so I was disappointed he couldn't be in attendance. But he had done a study on patients with COPD, which of course is chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, which in America is the #3 reason that people die. So that includes emphysema and chronic bronchitis. And in a study that he did with 50 patients, he gave patients either a placebo or a 30C of Cali-Bic. Now, at first blush, I was worried about seeing such a trial because I couldn't imagine that Cali-Bic would be good for just anyone. And as it turns out, it was remarkably effective. This article, this study, was published in one of the most respected respiratory medicine journals in the world called Chest. It was conducted at the University of Vienna Hospital. Though sadly, there were 2 groups of researchers, one in Israel and one in New York, that had planned to replicate it. But for unknown reasons, well, actually one reason in one of the places, the doctors refused to provide referrals for the COPD, so they weren't getting enough patients. But my point here is that in homeopathy, for us to actually get accepted, it's not just important that we have a lot of research. We need research that's been replicated, and research that's been replicated by independent groups of people. But then it's hard to do that research when institutions don't allow us to do the research. And I had talked with a number of the other speakers there who, although they were in highly respected institutions, and even conventional institutions, they couldn't get their research published in conventional journals. And so they told me stories about submitting their articles to this journal or that journal and then being rejected within hours. I know my own review of research that I conducted with Dr. Frass on a review of research on homeopathy and the treatment of respiratory allergies. We sent it off first to allergy. Because what we did is we reviewed the research, not only that of David Riley of the University of Glasgow, where he had 2 articles published in the British Medical Journal and another study published in the Lancet. And there were other studies. And what we did, rather than do our own meta-analysis, we reviewed what other meta-analyses, how they ranked these different studies. And there was generally unanimity of opinion that Dr. David Riley's research was of the highest quality. But still, when we submitted it to allergy, once again, within hours, it was rejected.
And that's very strange because these journals are peer-reviewed journals, and ideally peer review takes a lot of time. The editor has to go through, then this article has to be sent to a peer, an expert for review, and only then you can reject or accept any article.
That's right.
Any paper.
The bottom line is that homeopathy is being blackballed.
Yes,
That there is a unscientific attitude. And you know, what ends up happening is that I was at one point a consultant to the World Health Organization. They did a conference in the 1990s of what will the World Health Organization be doing in the year 2020. And someone that I know and respect was organizing it, and he invited me to speak because he knew, as a futurist that he is, that heretics may be part of the future. And you know, it really showed a certain intellectual strength that to ask a homeopath to be part of it, but in fact it makes sense. In order to predict the future, you have to have outliers or people that are thinking differently. Now mind you, you can sometimes predict the future more easily when the future is already happening.
Yes.
Throughout the world.
Yes.
Like what we're seeing here. In fact, I just read a report that the that the growth of homeopathy in India will be doubling by the year 2017, which is not that far away.
Yes.
I mean, now, I don't know what they were comparing it with. I think it was, the year 2000. But that still is, a real high level of growth. And of course, in Europe, the most popular alternative medicine in Europe practiced by doctors is homeopathy. And so, and then there were several presenters at this conference from Brazil. And Brazil is right now, looks like it's going to win the silver medal in the homeopathy Olympics.
Yes, that's right.
Both, once again, because the amount of research is going on there. And actually, a lot of it is even basic science research.
Basic science research, and they are also doing very good research on animal studies and agro-homeopathy.
Right.
So there's research coming that's very difficult to refute.
Right.
And then there's the large-scale application. It's not just theoretical research that's happening.
Right. And a real practical value. I mean, they're showing effects on diseases in fish, and that's important for those of us that eat fish. It's important in different infectious disease and in public health. In dengue fever, which is both common here in India as well as in Brazil and in many third world countries. Yeah.
So yes, Dana, my opinion is also that we should not just focus on research which is randomized and placebo-controlled. We need to focus on outcome studies.
Right.
Because outcome studies, in my opinion, are something that can be conducted in clinical practice. You don't need such rigorous controls for them, and still they are accepted as valid scientific research. Although of the lower order, but still they cannot be disapproved.
Right.
So yes, I totally agree with your opinion that we should work more on the clinical growth of clinical acceptance and growth and proving of homeopathy also, and not just the physical research part. Donna,
can I talk a little bit about outcome studies? Because that is an important point, and they can and should be done. And although they don't have the same rigor as the double-blind placebo-controlled trials, I sort of think of the double-blind placebo-controlled trials as like a rocket ship. And these double-blind placebo-controlled trials are those that are important to get the rocket ship off the Earth that is pulling, our gravity is pulling it down. And they become the things that answer the skeptics. But once we get into space, then these outcome studies are really going to be important, because then we're going to say, wow, look at all this work that's been done. So we see really what are more common remedies for some of these common ailments, and what potencies perhaps are more commonly indicated and more therapeutically beneficial. So they may not be good to get us off the ground, but they'll be useful in the near future.
yes. But when you say about satisfying the skeptics, isn't it very hard to do? Because if a person is skeptical, there are true scientifics. There's a true scientific skepticism that is acceptable. But majority of people who are skeptical about homeopathy, they outrightly reject any research, even double-blind, placebo-controlled trials, which are very, very rigorous. They're all rejected en masse.
Okay. I do not ever expect to change the mind of certain skeptics. But when I sometimes go to skeptics' websites and I make my comments, I'm not expecting to change them. I'm expecting to change the readers' minds, who are curious and maybe be skeptical, but not stuck in the cement, not stuck in the mud, not what we call bad skeptics.
Yes.
The healthy, oriented skeptics. Now, I do get very upset that so many of these bad skeptics misinform people.
Yes.
They actively tell people that there's no evidence that homeopathic medicines have any effect. They say that there's not any molecules in our medicines. And not only at this conference in Mumbai was Professor Kane, K-A-N-E, present, who is at Bombay IIT, the Indian Institute of Technology, and he and his group of scientists did that important research that found nanoparticles remaining in 6 different mineral remedies, no matter if they did the 6C, the 30C, or the 200C. And they explained quite well using conventional understanding of physics and chemistry and water, as to why this would happen. So in fact, when any skeptics say that homeopathic medicines are beyond Avogadro's number, we can rightfully say that Avogadro's number has nothing to do with the manufacture of homeopathic medicines, because it doesn't account for the shaking in the glass, the silica fragments that fall off the glass, the bubbles and the nanobubbles, which create increased water pressure, and whatever medicine we're making then attaches to these silica fragments, and then when you pour the water out, the silica fragments clean the glass walls.
Yes.
And so you can measure, using 3 different types of spectroscopy, nanoparticles remaining. And for anyone with a simple understanding of modern endocrinology and even neurology that notices how small of a dose certain neurotransmitters are known to create dramatic physiological effects, these are often at the 6x to even 20x dose range. And the trick to homeopathy is not just that these small doses, these nanodoses, can have significant effects. The trick here is that they can and will only have this effect when there is the right receptor to that nanodose. And that's why I now like to refer to homeopathy as not the law of similars, but the law of resonance. Because resonance is a beautiful, both physics and music metaphor that notices that there is a hypersensitivity between a C note and another C note, even at a distance. And that they are cumulative, and they will create these significant results at great distances. And it's not just a coincidence that this principle of resonance is also at the basis of modern immunology, so that there's an immunological reaction. And to me, that's important. And so I continually find some of these bad-minded skeptics consciously and purposely misinforming people. Because it's not that they're saying this out of ignorance. They know the evidence.
Yes.
And in fact, what I have had some discussions with these skeptics, and they now say that homeopathic medicines are contaminated with the ingredients that we say is in there. Or they say they're contaminated with silica fragments, as though there isn't silica fragments in the air we're breathing right now. So, I mean, it's challenging to interact with the skeptics, and I try and do so vigorously, and to not let them assume that they are correct.
But all that effort has given you a lot of bad name on Wikipedia and Rational Wiki. The pages literally suck.
Well, I do want to warn my fellow homeopaths out there that if you're going to choose to edit on Wikipedia, make certain to never edit under your real name. You see, I think of myself as a highly ethical person, and as such, I chose to edit under my real name. And then the skeptics said, wait a minute, this man practices homeopathy. This man writes books on homeopathy. Therefore, he has a conflict of interest.
Yes.
Now, if I were a medical doctor and I was editing under homeopathy, on that point of view, then I shouldn't edit because I have a conflict of interest for allopathy. And so, but they don't do anything to stop doctors from editing on subjects that are antagonistic to them, or that even on medical subjects. Either way, I believe that we should be honored for our expertise, not...
Yes. That is what Wikipedia is all about, that the experts in a certain subject should be writing the articles on that subject. And here, when it comes to homeopathy, the articles written about homeopathy are all by skeptics and not by the experts in the field. And that's very shameful, rather.
Now, some of you may know of an article that I wrote about the bias, the extreme bias that exists on Wikipedia.
Yes,
and
I know you met the founder of Wikipedia.
And I actually quoted the Washington Post, which had published an article that said the 2 most controversial subjects on Wikipedia in the 4 leading languages of English, French, Spanish, and German was Jesus Christ and homeopathy.
Number 2. So that's a great honor, because there is a saying, there is a shade, a form of poetry in Hindi, in Urdu rather. A couplet says, "Ki naam badnaam sahi naam to hai," which means I might be ill-famous, but I'm still famous.
Yeah. Yeah, if only could I have if I only could have a nickel for everyone that knows my name.
So, okay, let's leave the skeptics out. I did that long back when I created First 24 Cam, and then we used to have a lot of such skeptics at H20 forums also. So I wrote an advisory for our fellow homeopaths on h20.com for the skeptics that don't wrestle with the pigs. One, the pigs love it, and second, you get dirty.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
So from that day onwards, I've been following this practice at h20.com and looking for Cam. No need to argue with people who simply do not listen to your even valid arguments. Rather focus on creating quality work, quality research, which people who are receptive will be open to and will learn from.
Right.
But still, you have been, you have encountered skepticism for homeopathy right in your home. Your father was a conventional physician, a pediatrician if I'm right. And
ironically, or even cosmically, he was also an allergist. Which to me is quite cosmic. So that means that, you know, I have the homeopathic principle of similars in my very blood. And it's thus more than cosmic that here I spoke at this conference on homeopathy and respiratory allergies.
Yes.
So
I have read that your father was skeptical about homeopathy and so was your sister. Did they change their skepticism over the years?
yes, they did actually. First of all, my sister ended up having this chronic complaint that my father arranged her to go to 5 different specialists and experience exploratory surgery on 2 different occasions, and they couldn't figure out what was going on. So I finally asked if she wanted to be treated. And you know, it's always challenging to treat your family.
Yes, it's very challenging.
And I didn't enter this for many years because of that. But after the 2nd exploratory surgery, as her brother, older brother, I felt compelled to at least offer. And in this case, when she said no, I then insisted, and she finally accepted. And I prescribed a homeopathic medicine for her, Calcarea carbonica, and called her in 2 weeks. And when I asked her if there was any changes, she said no. And then I got out her file and I began asking more specifics. And as it turns out, all of her symptoms, not her main complaint, disappeared. And yet she refused to believe that it was homeopathy. She just thought it went away on its own. Because as it turns out, she had thought that it wasn't 2 weeks, but that it was many months. And I didn't really make the point of it on that phone call there, but the next time I saw her when we were all together as a family, I had her case there. And my father then saw his own daughter refusing to believe that it was homeopathy. And that was very impressive to him because it wasn't belief. Now, I should say that my sister, shortly after that, and her family began using homeopathy. So, and my father had a change of heart too, and he believed that, you know, when our family gets sick, we should try homeopathy first. And now, mind you, he had one other influence that I showed him, which had a big impact on him. And I come from a Jewish heritage. And my father, before going to medical school, was a serious violinist, and even could have considered becoming a professional violinist, though he chose to go into medicine instead. And being Jewish and being a violinist, you may know that one of the most famous violinists in the 20th century was a Jewish man named Yehudi Menuhin, who, when I told my father he was the president of England's homeopathy organization, that really impressed him. That a man that he revered more than anyone else was a passionate advocate of homeopathy, which then was inspirational to me, that as much as I felt that some doctors and some skeptics needed a change of mind and heart by research, sometimes they just needed to know that someone that they knew and that they had a high respect for was an appreciator of homeopathy. And that ultimately inspired me to write my book, The Homeopathic Revolution.
I've gone through that book. It's a wonderful, wonderful compilation of all the historical facts about homeopathy. who are the greatest people who have ever used homeopathy and why they have used it and their experiences with homeopathy, I'm sure that it's a milestone for homeopathic literature, because nothing like that book has ever been written before.
Right.
And I'm sure that book of yours is going to be cherished for generations to come.
And you know, it's been nice to gather the stories together in one place and find that there were not only politicians and peacemakers, but 11 American presidents and heads of state of dozens of countries. But you know, anything from 7 popes to leading Muslim clerics, leading Jewish rabbis, and of course virtually all the Eastern gurus.
Yes.
And I've always sort of felt that maybe something like homeopathy can be useful in getting different religions together. That they can speak without talking about religious questions, but realize that they have something in common. And I do hope that one day homeopathy be a uniting force for the different ways of life and different beliefs that we have. But it was also fun writing the Literary Greats chapter and showing how many of the most educated and intelligent people in the world
They have used homeopathy.
have been advocates of homeopathy, that have written about homeopathy, that have included characters that were protagonists in their novels and writings about homeopathy. And as well as Hollywood celebrities and sports superstars and musicians, from Beethoven and Chopin to Tina Turner and Cher. And many years ago I predicted that homeopathy would get famous because it cured Elizabeth Taylor's cat of feline leukemia.
Yes.
This was before I even thought of writing this book. Of course that never did happen, but I do feel that all it takes is just one person that we know and respect to have a dramatic benefit, and then it begin to open up people's hearts and minds.
Yes, at the same time we need people who can deliver results to bring that kind of faith. My own family has more than a dozen conventional physicians, extended family. Most of my friends are conventional doctors,
Right.
gastroenterologist, oncologist, all kind of specialists, dermatologist, ophthalmologist, and nearly all of them take homeopathy. All of them. Even the pediatrician calls me up for treating his children.
Right.
The ophthalmologist calls me up for treating the eye conditions in the family.
Right.
The gastroenterologist calls me up for treating the diarrhea and constipation in the kids. So it's good to see that even those who are on the opposite end, they are actually very receptive to homeopathy, provided they get to see the results.
Right. Well, to me, ultimately, results speak louder than everything.
Yes.
And one of the things that the skeptics don't really understand is the real limitations of placebo.
Yes.
In fact, there's a whole body of literature to suggest that placebo is not nearly as much as we think it is. That, in fact, whenever there have been studies that showed a treated group, a placebo group, and an untreated group, the untreated group and the placebo group are often going the same direction. Because sometimes when you begin a study, the person's at the worst. And it's not that the placebo really improves the person, but the natural evolution of the disease ebbs and flows.
Yes.
And where homeopathy is strongest is in the treatment of people with chronic disease. And to actually see, as we do on a regular basis, the real miracles of people improving. And although there's evolution and ebbs and flows of the disease process, there's significant steps forward. And that's what's so impressive in homeopathy. I'm sure virtually every homeopath sees, like I see, miracles every day. And I still have to admit, to be blown away
Yes.
by the results that I see in my practice.
Yes.
And it's so affirming of our work. And, flying here to India, I saw a movie called The Equalizer. And it begins with a quote from Mark Twain that I thought was one of the most profound quotes I ever heard. And I had to stop at the movie and write it down. And here's what it is. He said, that there are two important days in your life. The day you were born and the day you figured out why.
I've heard it.
And those of us that are involved in homeopathy know that the reason why we were born was to do this important work. The
Absolutely.
path of a homeopath.
Absolutely.
And now mind you, if you think of the future of medicine, we know that homeopathy is going to be in the future.
Yes.
But the birth of this, it's sort of like that rocket ship metaphor. It just takes the most amount of energy to get it off the ground. Now right now the forces against homeopathy are increasing. But the way I like to think about it is that dinosaurs yelled and screamed loudest before their fall.
Yes.
So we have to persist, we have to strategize, and we have to avoid what I see in some of my colleagues. And just today I wrote an email to a colleague who was doing what I call fear-mongering. You know, right now the FDA is investigating, doing a hearing on homeopathy this month. And he's telling people that the FDA is going to close homeopathy down. Now, we don't have any evidence of that happening. They're asking questions, and they have every right to ask questions. And I think it does a real disservice when we right now say that the sky is falling, when that's not true. At least not yet. Now, if and when the sky is falling, we can and should talk about it. So we can express concern, but fear-mongering, I think, is counterproductive.
But when the sky fell last time in 1920s, we don't see a lot of change happening on the ground in America especially. Homeopathy continues to struggle. There are still too few homeopaths. The last college that opened there, the American Medical College of Homeopathy, is actually struggling to stay afloat.
No, actually it did die. But there's a problem that they tried to do. They were very ambitious in what they tried to do. Is rather than to create a homeopathic school that was postgraduate, rather than educate people that were already doctors or nurses or naturopaths or chiropractors or acupuncturists, they tried to get a person that was unlicensed entirely and create a medical school. That is a very big project. And I personally felt from the beginning that they'd be better off working to educate already licensed people. And there are a variety of schools that are doing that and that are succeeding. The bottom line is, I know a lot of people are looking to America, but to be honest, I don't think the answer is going to come from America this time. I think the answers are going to come from India, from Brazil, from France, from Italy, from Germany, from Russia. And there was an old movie from the 50s called The Mouse That Roared.
Yes.
And, you know, maybe even Cuba is what we're seeing.
The leptospirosis research has been amazing.
And so I'm both touched that everyone is looking to America. And I'm reminding people that the mouse is roaring, and there's a lot of mice.
Yes. But the problem with the mice is that the mice are poor.
That's right.
And one of the reasons that world looks towards America is because of the funding. If there is a greater acceptance that can come in American community, American people, American politics, American policymakers, then the amount of funding that can go into research related to homeopathy would be tremendously increased.
Right.
So, and that is one of the reasons. And there are a lot of countries who actually follow the American lead.
Right.
Especially when there is crucial research. A lot of medical research is still happening in America. A lot of IT research is still happening in America.
Right. To understand why it's not happening in America is to understand the two important things. One, in America, there is what I call a medical machismo.
Yes.
And it's a whole language around health and disease that's fighting language. And it's a military thinking, that we have to attack disease, we have to combat disease, we have to create a war on cancer and a war on the body. And so there's that going on. And then there's economics. I'm going to give you a fact that's hard to accept as true. But because this fact came from the former editor of the New England Journal of Medicine, who is now a professor at Harvard University, And because her name is Marcia Angel, M-A-R-C-I-A, wrote a book called The Truth About Drug Companies. So what I was saying that Professor Marcia Angel said, that if you took the Fortune 500 companies, which are the 500 largest corporations in the world, and if you took the 10 big pharma companies out of it, in the year 2001, the year of the famous terrorism, these 10 big pharma companies made more profit than the remaining 490 companies combined, which is such an outrageous fact that 10 companies in any field would overwhelm the profit margins of 490 companies, which include all the oil companies, all the other energy companies, all the real estate companies, all the banking companies, all the tobacco companies, all of them combined. And so there is a gorilla in the room. And if you think about it, because Big Pharma become the biggest advertisers of big media, you know, Big Pharma has big media in its back pocket.
Absolutely.
And so for those of us that are questioning Big Pharma, we're doing so with two strikes against us. And yet, you know, if you're a parent, you're going to protect your baby no matter what. And sometimes our baby is ourselves.
Yes.
Sometimes our baby is our parents.
Yes.
Sometimes our baby is, you know, our community. And so we do have to stand up, whatever it takes. And so you can't always trust what you read, even from authoritative sources. And for those of us that recently read these stories about how the Australian government said that homeopathy wasn't found to be good for anything, of course we know better. But what none of the media have acknowledged was their definition of found to be effective was that they ignored every study that we've published in the Lancet, the British Medical Journal, in pediatrics, in chest, in rheumatology, in cancer, unless it had more than 150 subjects. And even if we did, they would consider it unreliable unless there were two other studies published or conducted by two separate groups of researchers showing efficacy. Now there actually are studies on the flu medicine from France, that oscillococcinum. But even though they were double-blind and placebo-controlled, there might have been some other minor problem in that particular study. So that gave the researchers an excuse to ignore the entire body of evidence. And it must be said that if any other alternative was evaluated using the same definitions and restrictions, then acupuncture would be considered ineffective and useless. That herbal medicine, and we know is so important, would be considered completely ineffective and useless. And to be honest, even the British Medical Journal, when they did their own review of conventional medicines, only 11% of their therapies, despite the billions of dollars done on research, were found to be effective.
I know that.
Now, all of this context was not in the media reports from the Australian government.
That's true. We know that we don't have the monetary powers that the financial big muscled gorillas, the conventional medicine has. Still, what is it that we can do as a community to change the perception in the public? How we can make the public more receptive, more open and more friendly towards homeopathy? How we can make them try at least once?
Well, you know, although I am not allowed to edit on Wikipedia, I go there just to observe some things. And I am shocked how few homeopaths even try to educate people. Secondly, I am, when I speak at different conferences, always surprised how little information that homeopaths themselves know about our own research base. And therefore I was pleased that India had a whole 2-day conference devoted only to research. And so I think it's very important that all of our schools begin to educate all of the students and that the homeopathic organizations begin to educate our fellow clinicians about what research we have. Now, what I'm doing about that is I've written an ebook, which is an Acrobat file that provides the most up-to-date information about research in homeopathy, each according to a specific disease. And so we need to educate people about homeopathy in each of the disease categories. Because now, if you go online and at your website, you have some very useful information about research. But they're long lists of studies. There's no organization to them at all. And so what user-friendly contribution I provide with this ebook is the research under arthritis is in the arthritis chapter. The research on asthma is there, on ADD and ADHD is there. And so, by the way, you as a clinician have a patient in front of you. And the patient in front of you may even be an advocate for homeopathy. But his or her partner may be skeptical. Or his or her father or father-in-law or mother-in-law may be skeptical. And by printing out that chapter on migraine headaches, that person brings it home, shows it to the skeptical person, and then begins to get more support for them. And guess what? You might even end up giving it to a neighbor, and you might even get a patient as a result of it. And so we have to educate ourselves. We have to begin to educate our own patient population. And we also have to begin responding to the regular reports that we read in the media. Because I regularly get people that say, hey Dina, this other newspaper said something about homeopathy that we don't like. Please respond. And I'm thinking, am I the only one in the world? I mean, we need what I call...
It's not without reason that we call you the greatest spokesperson for homeopathy.
And, you know, as it turns out, I have a 20-year-old son that's now in the university. And I made a promise to him 3 years ago when he began it that I would stop writing on homeopathy unless I was funded to do so. Because I now have a $50,000 a year bill that I have to pay for his tuition and living expenses. And so I've been spending more of my time in my practice. And people that want me to write, I say, well, if you want me to write, then support my nonprofit foundation, because I can't afford to do so anymore. And that's why you have not seen as many articles over the past several years. And when you have seen articles, it's because people have given some financial support to my nonprofit organization so that I can create time to do this important work. But, you know, one, I can't do it without your support. And two, you know, you can educate yourself so that you can be that spokesperson, you can be that defender of homeopathy, you can be the educator about research. And this ebook is a simple, user-friendly way to do it, and it's also a clever way for you to educate people so that you develop and expand your own practice.
One of the things that you mentioned, Dana, is that we need to stand together, we need to create more spokespersons for homeopathy. And you see in India also that there is a lot of coherent effort from different departments for promoting homeopathy. Yet at the same time, internally we know that we are a divided house. We are divided amongst our own philosophies, schools, and the division is actually very difficult to bridge. We have been seeing this divide since last 20-30 years. It's just increasing and increasing and increasing. There's actually no uniformity in the way homeopathy is being practiced in different parts of the world. Even in India, where we say that we have the largest number of homeopaths, where we say that we have the largest government support, it's sad to see that most of the homeopaths are actually practicing complex homeopathy, polypharmacy. So, on one hand, we have, in America, we don't have the structure, we don't have the government support, and we don't have the popular base.
Right.
In Europe, we do have some popular base, we do have some government support, but still we see a large majority of people practicing polypharmacy, complex homeopathy. In India, where it's the most popular, again we see that we have got nearly 180 full-time medical colleges, medical schools for homeopathy here. Then every year nearly 20,000 students take admission in those schools. So despite having the infrastructure, we see that the education is probably lacking, that we are not actually practicing homeopathy the way it should be. And even those who are practicing classical homeopathy, they are divided amongst very different many schools. So how can we actually stand up united towards the adversaries, towards the forces which are attacking us from the outside, if we are divided from within?
Well, in America, we have a history of this division too. But over the last 20 years, most of that division has almost disappeared. I say that because there used to be a big difference between the high potency and the low potency, and then of course this third group doing the different formula products. And there was always certain antagonisms from all parts. And then there'd be an antagonism between the medical doctors and the non-medical doctors. But nowadays, no medical doctor has any animosity for anyone else that does good homeopathy. It's just support. And, I have also been an advocate for accepting all different types of homeopathy. Did you know that Harris Coulter, the leading historian for homeopathy, got introduced to homeopathy from a homeopathic formula product? Do you know that Dr. Edward Whitman also got introduced to homeopathy, the greatest Jungian homeopath in the history, from a formula product? So I think of homeopathy as like yoga, that you can't expect a person that's just being introduced to yoga to do yoga the right way for the greatest, spiritual development, when he or she just gets introduced to it. Or maybe even after practicing it for a number of years. You finally see what its potential is. And then you do it more and more, and you get taught more and more. And so I think we have to learn that a principle in yoga is you get the person where they are, and you then take them forward.
Yes.
And you also realize that even though you and I may be doing different styles of homeopathy, we have more in common than we have in difference. And so I like to remind people of this, because the forces that be would rather us fight. They'd rather us have these disagreements so that we weaken ourselves. And the more we realize that that is an effective strategy for them to win, we have to resist that. And so I have a point of view that sees nature as this complex web of life. And a web actually becomes stronger the more complex it is. So if we all did homeopathy the same way, first of all, I just don't think that it could be possible. Because your style of a human being and my style of a human being, I wouldn't be true to my nature if I did things one way or another. In fact, I was talking with one of Rajan Sekharan's leading students. And he told me that he uses the sensation method, but only as one of the ways that he practices. And that sometimes he will see a case and it needs a miasmatic remedy from the get-go. And other times it is, a worse from a specific incident. And sometimes it's just a keynote. And then I told him that the best homeopaths don't practice one style of homeopathy, that they hear the patient and see what the patient needs. And so all the different ways of homeopathy are right. It's like the whole story of the elephant, we're all standing at different views. And then we have to realize that the best homeopaths will change according to what the needs or what the symptoms of the patient are.
That is what individualization is about.
Right.
The moment we choose a particular method, we are actually getting prejudiced.
Right. And so, the more we realize that life is this prism and this hologram, and you can choose to look at it from one way or another way, and you're both seeing something that's the same thing, but your strategies to get to the core are just different. And one might be a faster way, one might be a slower way. But in fact, even when you use combinations, you won't get a cure, but you'll get progress. And that is so much better than the suppression. And I know some of our homeopaths say that homeopathy can suppress. And that may be true, but that is so rare. And that if we're going to overemphasize suppression, first of all, I think that's the surest way to get, the opponents of homeopathy some more fuel. And, I just don't want to feed that gorilla. I just don't want to feed it. And so, and I know a colleague that reviewed 3,000 of his cases to see where there may have been suppression. And he did write about, over the 3,000 cases, 3 cases that he thought could have been. And if you read them, clearly 2 had other explanations, including just the patient not given the right remedy, and they just progressively got worse.
Yes.
So most of the time, this suppression idea is rare, and it depends on, are you going to focus on the super rare situation? Not in my life. I'm not going to be doing that.
Yes.
And so, once again, we have so much more common with our colleagues, and I think when you look at nature and you respect complexity, I say let 1,000 flowers bloom. And along with the flowers, get some of the mineral remedies here, get some of the animal remedies in here, get some of the no-subs in here. But, speaking of some of our words, I do think we need to update our language. I do think it is very beneficial to now refer to homeopathy as what I call a nanopharmacology and a nanomedicine. In fact, I think of homeopathy as the original nanomedicine. And I do a Google alerts for the word nanomedicine and the words nanopharmacology. And it's amazing how often these words are now being used by conventional thinking. And because homeopathy is the original style of using these nanodoses. And I know also some of my colleagues say, look, Dana, homeopathy is beyond nano. It's smaller than that. And in fact, according to this research published in Langmuir, published and conducted at India's Institute of Technology, there are nanoparticles. That's part of our explanation. It's not the entire explanation, because there are other energetics that are involved, yes, clearly. But one of the explanations clearly is that homeopathy is a nanomedicine. And thus, this is part of the future of medicine. And the more we can even use this word nanomedicine, will be seen as a part of this future of medicine. And then, even thinking about this law of similars, thinking of it in terms of resonance. Because no one can deny that there is a hypersensitivity when there's resonance. And we're just matching the toxicology of the medicine with the symptomology of the patient. And then there's that hypersensitivity. In fact, then this weekend at this Global Homeopathy Foundation's conference on research, a conventional scientist that's in one of the academic centers here told me that we have to stop using the word nosomes and simply call them biotherapies. Because biotherapies is what doctors use when they use these pathogens in small dose. And, this just use the word biotherapies. And so I think we can maintain the stature and our traditions of homeopathy, at the same time, modernize our language.
Yes, that is so essential, because a lot of the words that we use, both in our organum, in our materia medica, words like diathesis, they're not used anywhere.
Right. No.
And they're actually difficult to understand in contemporary sense. We don't even know how exactly they were used. It's like the word miasm.
Our epigenetics is a good term for miasm. And in fact, it shows that homeopathy has been considering these genetic issues and epigenetic issues since the 19th century. Now, it is ironic. In the United States, there's this cable station called HBO, which goes all over the world. And they have a new news program called Vice. And in March of 2015, they did an hour-long program about how the Mayo Clinic is now treating people with cancer with small doses of measles virus and polio virus. And in other words, they're using our no-nos or our biotherapies.
Yes.
And in fact, it's also helping me to wonder that maybe when we as children got measles, maybe that was important for our immunological development to help prevent us from getting cancer. And I'm wondering if our vaccines are creating this predisposition to some of the more serious illnesses, because these childhood illnesses were important parts of stimulating the immunological muscle that our immune system is. And by taking away that opportunity to exercise that immunological muscle, we are developing these chronic diseases. And so one of these days we're going to realize and wake up that some of these principles, you have to excuse me, the humidity here is a little difficult in this, leading to this cough for me. But these principles in homeopathy from the 19th century really are a 21st and even, for that matter, 22nd century science.
Donna, I have seen that the conventional medicine, that if they see that there is something that works, if there is a new drug, a new method that seems to work, they tend to borrow that, include it in their own science, because then it becomes a source of profit.
Right.
Is it a remote possibility that someday the mechanism of homeopathy would be better understood with the help of physics, and we are going to get hijacked?
Yes.
Because we don't have the muscle, we don't have the money, we don't have the political powers, and as you say, when we say nosode, we are criticized. When they say biotherapy, they are accepted.
Right.
When we say 20x, we are ridiculed. When they say nanomedicine, they are approved.
Right.
So I see a remote possibility when there is certainly an acceptance that they won't be able to deny the nanomedicine, the way homeopathy works beyond a certain level.
Yeah.
And then they will accept it so wholeheartedly that the homeopaths themselves will be marginalized because they are not trained, they are most times not legally qualified to deal with serious diseases, they are not licensed to treat serious diseases, and suddenly we'll see that the homeopaths are marginalized, they are just on the fringe, and the whole homeopathy is taken over by the conventional medicine.
Sure. No, I do expect homeopathic principles to be hijacked. And I look forward to that in some ways. Now, it has a two-edged sword. I think look forward to it because anything that we can do to reduce the amount of conventional drugs that we're giving to people will be better off, even if it's a variety of small doses of formula products. That people's health will be better off than the overwhelming pathology and toxicology that conventional polypharmacy is creating for people. And I will always assume that it will be a limited number of doctors that want to do the study that's really necessary to be a good homeopath. That most of the time, these doctors will hire other people to do these case taking and to do the case analysis, and they'll just overview the overall care of the person. And so, at the same time, and so there'll only be a minority of people that want to will do the research and study to be good, classically oriented homeopaths. But like I said, I think we'll still be better off than where we are right now, where we're being ignored, we are being attacked, and doctors are using stronger and stronger doses of more and more drugs. Once again, to quote Mark Twain, he said that there's a certain evolution to how new ideas are accepted. And at first they're ridiculed and attacked, and then the next stage is they're thought to be true but of little or inconsequential value, and the third stage is they are true, they are of consequential value, but because we have verified it, we are the ones that invented it.
Yes.
And so Mark Twain, had said that we have to thank the homeopaths for helping us educate us about the allopaths and how dangerous they are. And that we fought them tooth and nail. And that even though we might, as he would say, not use homeopathy ourselves, we still have to thank the homeopaths. And, you know, I think that is words of wisdom that are true, were true then, are true now, and we recognize true in the future.
Yes, indeed, Dana. One of your ventures that has helped create a lot of education amongst homeopaths and also amongst the conventional physicians is the homeopathic.com. In fact, you are the homeopathic.com.
Here's one little bit of justice that happened to be true, is the right guy got that website. I mean, I do take certain pride in that living in the San Francisco Bay Area,
Yes.
and being on the cutting edge of some technology and some healing and medical thought, it does make sense that I got it, and darn, it's a valuable product.
Tell me about it. How did homeopathic.com happen, and how has it fared over the years?
Well, it was actually David Workington, the founder of McRepertory, who I'm honored to say I gave a lecture at UC Berkeley, and even though there were 50 people in the room, there was one guy right at eyes range that was listening to me speak, and I could tell he was getting it, and that was David Workington. I was that person that introduced David Workington to homeopathy. And he was instrumental in creating the first network of homeopaths to have email and to discuss things. That became HomeoNet. And so that got me into email. And I thank him for that. And then I realized that, you know, I need to have a website early on. And that was when you could actually ask for almost any website and it was there.
Yes, it was.
And I mean, what's so impressive is that, you know, the vast majority of homeopaths in Europe and in America and possibly in India use software. And so we are even using expert system software to improve the patient care we're providing. And of course, conventional doctors are using software too, but it's mostly for billing their patients. You know, so how homeopaths have entered the computer age is very different from the way physicians have. Now, mind you, some physicians are now finally helping to coordinate the variety of drugs that their patients are on, because in the past, you know, because some patients are under the care of numerous doctors, they had no idea how many drugs and how many real bad interactions are taking place. And still there isn't adequate coordination of that information. But, so, you know, there are certain benefits for me to have lived in Berkeley, and it's typical that a person from Berkeley would write a book called The Homeopathic Revolution, you know. You know, it all sort of fits together.
You have been a celebrated author since last 30?
Well, since 1984, my first
your first book came in 1984. So, as an author, do you see an increasing acceptance for homeopathic literature in America and in general across the world? Or is it still hard to be a homeopathic author and publisher?
Well, I mean, right now books are all so 20th century, I'm afraid, that, you know, really my writing in the Huffington Post, you know, reaches so many more people, hundreds of thousands of millions of people. I mean, I've written 40 articles at the Huffington Post, and they've averaged 1,000 comments per article. And so that suggests that hundreds of thousands of people are looking at that. And so, you know, to me, online information is part of our future. And the next step is, you know, online videos. You know, so maybe this is an additional way that we can begin to educate people. But, you know, once again, I say may 1,000 flowers bloom. We need to educate people in many different ways. And whatever your person out there, your predilection, whether it be for writing a blog, for educating people to treat their cats or dogs, or horses and cows or rabbits, or children with autism or children with ADD or whatever it be, do it with gusto. Educate your particular niche of interest, and use it to grow homeopathy. Have whatever path that you walk on be your means of educating people. And then use research, use your stories of your own successes, use the stories of people who may have been skeptical and have been shocked and be surprised that the results that they've gotten made them no longer skeptical. Tell those stories.
Yes, it's so very important that all of us become the brand ambassadors for homeopathy.
Right.
It's not just our living, it's not just something that we are passionate about, but we need to actually go out and share the message with as many people as possible, and in as many varied ways as possible, in printed literature, through websites, through blogs, through YouTube, through social media. And I actually see a good change happening. I see so many social groups coming up, there's so much sharing, and there's so much also awareness about research, clinical practices, and you have been on the forefront of all these changes, and it's amazing to have you with us today.
Well, my honor. Like I say, I want to remind people out there that 1,000 flowers bloom. Let's collaborate with each other. Yes, we can have differences, and yet we can be brothers. We can be sisters. We can be family. We can respect our differences, but appreciate our commonalities.
That's so very important, and Dana, that's a wonderful message to actually end this interview on. And thank you once again. It was wonderful having you with us at Homeopathy here.
At the Shah Pura Hotel in Jaipur.
Yes.
And this is such an elegant city, and it's such an honor to be here.
It's our pleasure to host you here. Thank you so much, Dana.